Howdy my friends and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289, here on YouTube. And we're back to the mail Jeep again. You asked for it, you're gonna get it. And so, anyway, I got it all hooked up out back to the tractor. I did all this last night in the dark. You know, I come home from work, and I get home like 6 or so, you know, and this time of year that only leaves me like an hour to maybe do something in the daylight, and it's getting less and less and less. So, anyway, last night I got this thing all hooked up and we're gonna try and pull it out of the woods and the weeds that, you know, it's sat back here on my tree line since, you know, Lord knows how long enough that it's sunk into the ground pretty good. So tractor's all hooked up. We're gonna try and yank it out of there and get it up here where I can much more easily work on it, you know, given that I only have a few hours a day if I'm lucky. So with that, let's jump out here and get this thing. All right, here we are. We got the Ford all hooked up to the Jeep. Yesterday when I was out here last night in the dark, I tried to air up all the tires. Some of these were pretty darn flat, and then I tried to actually put it in neutral and see if I could even roll the vehicle. And it's either because the brakes are seized, which I wouldn't be surprised given all the humidity of it being out here. It's like the ballad of 1,000 mosquitoes even right now. But you know, either the brakes are seized or it sat down the hole and it's really sunk down in. Either way, with the thing in neutral and all that, I couldn't really roll the vehicle. Kind of concerning. So I don't know, you know, it's gonna be pretty hard to pull. I might regret using the tractor and wish I would have brought the F-250 down here, but I don't know, we'll just see how it goes, you know. 1942 20 or 30 horsepower versus a Jeep that's very well sunk into the mud or seized brakes, or both. It's probably both. Just going over a few final checks here before I put the grunt to her. Got the steering wheel locked so the front wheels can't try and turn on me going down the road. Probably be advantageous. Put this bad boy in neutral. There's no brakes in the thing, so I do actually hope the wheels drag a little bit because I have some hills, you know, and so I'd really like if the Jeep didn't run into the back end of the tractor. And considering I'm just pulling it with a chain, could get a little bit weird. This old tractor has been one of my most favorite vehicles I've ever got running. I don't know what's so fun about it. It's just kind of different, you know. It's like driving a Model A, but it's a tractor. So not at all like a Model A. Something broke her free. She was real tight. Pretty hard on the old clutch on the tractor, but she's finally seeming to move. Either the wheels broke free or we pulled it up out of the hole. Either way, she's coming on with us now, so here we go. Oh yeah. Little Ford's not having too much trouble. Well, this is definitely interesting. This would be a lot easier with two people, someone to steer. We're doing it okay, and we'll still probably get to work on time. That's a prime unit right there. That's definitely going in the dumpster. Okay. Bunch of animal poop in the corner, but other than that, could be worse. Not so bad. Let's see what we're dealing with for floors. How about that? I didn't even know these came with AC, but this must be a special unit. Keep your feet cool. It's got the floorboard air conditioning. Not too bad. That's about the worst rust on the whole rig, except for this spot here on the fender. But with that, my friends, let's see if we can get it to run. Alright, so first things first, my friends, there's a few things with revivals I'm always concerned about. The first one is after sitting, the cylinders can kind of rust up. The one that has the intake valve, exhaust valves open, you know, moisture can get in there and rust up those cylinders. Now, if you remember from our first video, this thing actually seemed to have a tight spot when cranking. So given that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all the spark plugs out, and we're just going to squirt a little bit of ATF in there and roll it over just to lubricate that top end as much as we can. Then if any rings are stuck, hopefully through a heat cycle, they'll free up. So we got to do that. Obviously we're going to change the oil, and then it has old varnished fuel in the back, so we're going to try and get some new fuel in the thing. But with that, let's get started. First things first, pull the plugs. Now, I'm pretty suspicious of this vehicle. It seems like it has a newer oil filter, starter, plug wires. The spark plugs are not all that rusted up, especially considering the humid area where it's been sitting. So, you know, kind of leads one to be suspicious of the fact that there may be a mechanical issue as to why this thing was parked. And a really quick tip, if you don't have the firing order of an engine memorized, it's very simple just to get a permanent marker and just mark on the plug wires 1 through however many cylinders your engine is, which in this case it's 6, and it's easy as it's in a line. So 1 through 6 marked, pull them all off and not have to worry about trying to remember the firing order or where they went. Assuming someone did the firing order right to start with, which, you know, you never know. So I got a little jug of ATF here, and then I got one of these pumps, and we're gonna just put in like maybe, there we go, about 3 pumps of ATF into the cylinder, again just to free everything up. This is one of those things that folks tend to go wrong with revivals. You know, stuff that's sat, they'll just shred the cylinder right away if they don't do something like this. So a little bit of lubrication in the chamber goes a long way after something's been dormant. All right, while we're letting that all marinate in the cylinders, it's a good opportunity to take a look at the distributor, cap, rotor, you know, a little corroded, easily scrape all that out and clean that up. But what I'm most interested in is actually the advanced mechanism and advanced plate. A lot of folks on these old carbureted engines, they always overlook ignition timing. And I always say carburetors are extremely forgiving. Ignition timing is where you make all your power and really what makes the vehicle run well. If this stuff is messed up, it's hopeless. So I've attached a little vacuum hose here to the vacuum port, and it should be, when I suck on this hose, basically we're, you know, making a vacuum on it, and we should see the advance plate move. I can already tell you from doing that, I can blow air and suck air right through it. So whatever diaphragm in here is completely gone. So vacuum advance is not doing anything. This is the other thing you always want to check, is shaft play. And I'll tell you what, I mean, if you can visually see it, it's pretty bad. This might be why this thing ended up getting parked. This distributor, you know, is pretty wore out. So the vacuum advance is hashed. The mechanical advance is pretty darn tight. Good and rusted up in there, but this shaft play is going to be a problem, especially if you add points ignition, because it's basically, when the shaft is moving around, it's altering your dwell. And so I'm not sure how it's going to play with this ignition system, but you know, I definitely classify the condition of this distributor as sub-ideal. I'm hoping I can band-aid it with initial timing, and you know, it'll at least run good enough to drive around pretty okay, but it just won't be optimum. Let's see what we're dealing with for a carburetor, so I never really looked that close. I think that says Carter, so it's probably a 1-barrel Carter carburetor, and it's going to determine if it's going to be able to live from sitting all this time. Is it's not seized, so that's good, but I'm sure that that accelerator pump in there is completely toast, and so that's going to be a problem when we go to run the thing. But we'll get some clean fuel in it and check that out. I don't have a Carter rebuild kit on me, so we might have to just clean it and do the best we can. Alright, so all the immediate vacuum leaks that I could see right off are plugged, and we have our choke wired open, so we're not going to have to be fooling with any of that. So at this point, let's go look at our gas tank situation, because we're going to have to do something there, or we really do run the risk of ruining the engine as soon as we would get it running. So we have our auxiliary gas tank all hooked up here, but I did notice it has a vent back here and it's crimped off, and that this is a vented gas cap when I looked at it, so, or at least it's definitely vented now from all the rubber petrifying. So, you know, this is one of those vapor separator fuel filters, and I'm not sure where that goes back to, but it definitely doesn't go back to the gas tank to any capacity from what I can tell. So I'm just going to cap that off, and that's a nice little trick there if you ever need to do something like that. Like say you're working on a Holly and you want to just change your jets out, you know, while the engine's running, you can just clamp this on. It'll run the carburetor completely out of fuel, the engine will shut off, and then you can work on it without spilling fuel all over the place. So nice little trick, works for brake lines also, and this, that, and the other thing. Now when I found this thing, the starter solenoid didn't seem to work, and I had to jump down to the battery, but the jump pack was also pretty dead at this point. Granted, it's only at 50% right now, but we're going to give it a shot. This thing looks a little unique. It's actually because it got run over with a trailer on power tour, so I kind of rewired some stuff and had to take it apart and put it back together. So we're kind of speed reviving here. Basically, I need to roll the engine over again to throw all that transmission fluid out, but at the same time, I'm going to try and test for spark here. So I got the coil lead hooked to a spark plug itself, and when that distributor turns, it should interrupt the ground, and it should be discharging a spark on this spark plug that's literally clamped to the negative terminal of the battery. So that ought to be a decent ground. Now the trick here is that since our starter solenoid is, you know, seemingly very questionable, I need to find a way to snake down to the starter, roll it over, and at the same time maintain power to the battery. I mean, I guess I could get a battery out of anything else that's good, but what fun is that, you know? Just use an ancient battery, it's fine. So first things first, we're going to turn the key on. It's looking good. I saw some of the gauges move, so that's a good sign. We have our negative lead of our multimeter on here, and I just want to see if we even have voltage to our coil for the possibility of spark. And it looks like we do. You can't use the negative side of the coil with your multimeter. You know, you need to go to an actual ground, because that signal is actually getting interrupted, and when that coil gets the interrupt, it discharges the spark. So if you're going to test voltage to the coil, you always have to use an auxiliary ground. So with that, it looks like as far as that goes, everything's good. I guess I need to find a way to roll the engine over and maintain power to the rest of the system with the key on to see if everything's going to work out. And hopefully I don't get slammed with transmission fluid, which I'm sure I will, because it's pointed directly right at my face. I know this wimpy lead is not enough to crank the starter, so some weird orientation here. So that should be good. This will also be nice because we'll actually be pumping, if the fuel pump works, which it looks pretty new, relatively, you know, the last 10 years. So maybe we'll get lucky and we can pump fuel up to our carb and get a good reading on the health of the needle and seat and whatnot. We can get this down here without touching anything we don't want to. That's the trick. This is quite the arrangement here. You guys probably can't totally see it on the cam, but my face, my glasses, my arms, and pretty much the whole front of my body is covered in transmission fluid from that little endeavor. But hey, gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. There we go. That's what I expected to see. I don't know how well you guys can see it on cam, but it's dripping from the booster. Come on, needle and seat. So at this point, aside from the needle and seat questionability on the carb, we're in pretty good shape. We have spark, everything's lubricated, we're getting fuel up to the carb at least. So everything's all reassembled here, plugs are in, all the plug wires are in. I do have the fuel line clamped because the carb should be full of fuel, you know, just if it does have a needle and seat issue, it won't try and flood. It's just going to try and run what's off the bowls here, which works for us for a good test. I can actually see where someone's whacked on it before, so I think there's been issues here previously, but this should allow us to at least fire the thing off. Now, given that the advance is all wore out, just a quick check here, I'm going to advance the mechanical initial advance, and since we have no vacuum, that's all we're working with here. Now, if you don't know which way the distributor turns, you can simply turn the rotor here, and what you're turning on is actually not the whole shaft turning, it's the advance plate for the mechanical advance within the distributor that's rotating, and as the engine spins faster and faster, the centrifugal force pulls those weights out and they'll advance that rotor. So that's what we're feeling there. We're just mechanically forcing those springs to turn. But the trick here is so you see it turns this way. If you don't know which way it is to advance the distributor, you want to turn the distributor body towards that advance mechanism. So if it's wanting to turn this way on the rotor, we're going to turn the distributor body back towards it this way and just advance our initial timing a skosh and see how it lights off. I got the mix screws set to 1 turn out, you know, just an arbitrary unit, and with that I'll get the distributor all buttoned back up and we'll try and roll the thing over. Oh, and I did steal the battery from the Maverick. We've gotten this far and I have some hope. I'm being overly optimistic, so I got a really good battery to try and roll the engine over with like 1,000 cranking amps, so that should be sufficient. So I wish I would have got this on cam here, but I actually took the cables off that starter solenoid, just scratched into them with a screwdriver and put them back on. And then I bumped the key and the engine rolled. So now we don't have to do all that weird stuff under the hood. The key will actually roll the engine over. So fingers crossed. Let's hit the key on this thing. Carburetor should be full. We have ignition. We have, in theory, all the parts for an engine to run. Let's see what happens. I bet you we're going to roll some smoke with that transmission fluid in the cylinders. Should be a good time. Oh man, well, apparently if you got long legs, you got to get in here a little weird. So, the moment I've all been waiting for. Kind of idling. Sounds questionable. Blew the transmission fluid out and ran. It has an oil pressure gauge and it's reading nothing. The valve train sounds loud, so I think before I run it any longer, I at least want to make sure that the oil pressure gauge is hooked up. You know, if it's zero, we're gonna have to figure something out, but a little suspicious. And the plot thickens here, because here's our oil sender line, and unless it's plugged, which I doubt it is, I've never seen that happen before, it's a mechanical gauge that goes right into the block, and I'm not seeing any oil on it. So, you know, I think what I want to do is pull the distributor out. I'm not sure, but it seems like most all engines, the oil pump drive is attached to the distributor and it's driven by the cam. At least on all the Fords, that's kind of how it works. So I assume this is the same way. So we're going to just pull that out and see if we can't prime the oil pump or do something, or if the oil pump drive shaft is just outright missing, or what happened with this thing. Like I said, someone's been around it in the recent past, but it's hard telling. But it seems to run good. It'll light right off, but you know, not having any oil pressure makes it pretty much a boat anchor. All right, so I've made a mark on the distributor body down to the engine, and then I've made a mark across from the rotor so we can get everything lined up without having to try all that hard, as long as we don't roll the engine over with the distributor out. But up and out she goes. Maybe, kind of, sort of. Struggling with one hand. So, there we go. There's your oil pump drive on the bottom of your distributor, and then your gear that engages your cam. Everything always gets parked for a reason. And so I basically made myself up a little Chrysler style oil pump driver tool. It's basically a flathead screwdriver. I just cut the end off of, as you can see there, maybe. So maybe you can't see. Come on, one hand. There we go. So just something to get down there and engage the oil pump or whatever and spin it. Now it's taken quite a bit of RPM to see any oil going up through the sender. So either it has a big leak, you know, it's definitely got the oil pump pickup attached. That was my first thought. Maybe it fell down in, but that doesn't seem to be the issue. I don't know, the oil pump could be foobarred, and sometimes the oil pump bypass spring will get stuck open as well. But if I can snake this back in here with one hand, look at all this pneumatic tubing they used for fuel line, or someone did at some point. You can see the pickup kind of moving. It's that clear line there right below that connector that goes basically right behind the connector and snakes around up into the cab. If I spin it really hard, you can see it move. Now, without an engine rotating, there should be a significant amount of resistance. I shouldn't be able to gun it quite like that. And so there's something wrong with the oil pump or the bearings. Either way, you know, there's something pretty suspicious going on here. That's probably why this thing got parked. Well, all right, my friends, I think that's going to do it for me today. What do you guys think is wrong? Personally, you know, there's something, from my perspective, I think there's something going on with the oil pump. I looked at the odometer, it has 155,000. Well, it has 55,000. We know it's at least 155,000. Could be 200 or 355,000. Hard telling, but I'm pretty sure these AMCs use an oil pump that's like a gear style, much like a Chevrolet, and they're a lot more prone to wearing out and causing oil pressure issues. It's not a pickup issue, because if I spin the drill fast enough, you know, we're getting oil up and around. And it doesn't sound like a knock, although we can hear a noise like, you know, knocking like a Jehovah's Witness, but it's in time with the valve train. So to me, it's much more likely just lifters not getting any oil as it's sitting there with no oil pressure at idle speeds. So, you know, could be a bad oil pump, but you know how that goes. A bad oil pump means someone probably drove it on a bad oil pump, and now it's a bad everything else. Which came first, chicken or the egg? Who knows? But I'm awful tempted to throw some very, very thick oil in here and see if we can get any oil pressure out of the thing. It ran pretty clean, and it idled pretty clean, surprisingly, especially given the carburetor and everything else. So I don't know, you know. What do you guys think we should do with the thing? I'll have to do some thinking myself. I'll see you for the next one. At least you can always rely on the Fords around here to get some work done.